Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I'm about to share with you the most transformative story of my life. If you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, if you've ever been told your dreams weren't practical enough, or if you've ever had to choose between pleasing others and staying true to yourself, then this story is for you. Picture this. I'm 29 years old, standing outside Lumiere, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan, wearing a simple black dress that cost me half my monthly rent 5 years ago. My hands are trembling, not from the cold October air, but from pure anxiety. Tonight, I'm about to face my family for the first time in 5 years. 5 long years of silence, judgment, and complete estrangement. You see, my family isn't just any family. We're the Mitchells of Greenwich, Connecticut. If you know anything about old money America, you know what that means. We're the kind of family where your worth is measured by your zip code, your alma mater, and how well you fit into the country club scene. My parents, Margaret and Richard Mitchell, didn't just have money. They had legacy, reputation, and very specific ideas about what their children should become. Growing up in our sprawling colonial mansion felt like living in a museum where I was just another carefully curated piece. Every dinner party, every charity gala, every social gathering was a performance. My mother would parade us kids around like trophies, introducing us with our achievements attached to our names like price tags. This is our eldest, Emma. She's at Yale Law, following in her grandfather's footsteps. And this is Michael, our youngest, straight A's in mathematics, destined for investment banking just like his father. And then there was me, the middle child, the creative one, the disappointment. Sarah has artistic inclinations, my mother would say with that tight smile I knew so well, the one that meant she was dying inside but had to maintain appearances. She'll find her way eventually. What she really meant was that I was the family failure, the one who didn't fit the mold, the one who embarrassed them at dinner parties when I couldn't recite my impressive career trajectory like my siblings could, while Emma excelled at debate tournaments and Michael won math Olympiads. I found my sanctuary in the most unexpected place, our kitchen. Not the formal dining room where we entertained guests, but the working kitchen where our housekeeper, Maria, spent her days creating magic. Maria was this incredible woman from Greece who had been with our family since I was 7. She had these weathered hands that moved like poetry when she kneaded bread, and eyes that sparkled when she talked about her grandmother's recipes from the old country. While my parents saw cooking as the help's work, Maria saw something in me that no one else did. "You have the hands for this, little one," she'd tell me as I helped her dice vegetables with surgical precision. "The way you taste, the way you smell the food as it cooks, you understand it in your soul." I was 13 when I created my first original recipe, a fusion of Maria's Greek techniques with flavors I discovered in cookbooks I borrowed from the library. By 16, I was hosting secret dinner parties for my friends whenever my parents traveled, transforming our sterile dining room into a warm, welcoming space filled with laughter and the kind of food that made people close their eyes and sigh with happiness. But in my family's world, this wasn't talent. It was embarrassment. "Cooking is servant's work," my father declared when I mentioned culinary school during my junior year of high school. "Mitchells hire chefs. Sarah, we don't become them." The disappointment in his voice was crushing, but what hurt more was the way he said it, like my passion was something shameful, something to be hidden away like a family scandal. So I did what good Mitchell children do. I compromised. I applied to business schools, eventually landing at Dartmouth, the same school my father and grandfather had attended. For 4 years, I played the part of the dutiful daughter studying business administration, but I never stopped feeding my real passion, I took every food science elective I could justify as complementary to business. I convinced my advisor that nutrition courses would help me understand consumer behavior. And in secret, I started an underground supper club in my tiny off-campus apartment, charging fellow students for innovative 5-course meals that funded my weekend workshops with local chefs. I was living a double life, and it was exhausting. During the day, I'd sit in marketing lectures and finance seminars, pretending to care about profit margins and market penetration. But at night, I'd lose myself in the meditative rhythm of knife work, the symphony of sizzling pans, the alchemy of transforming simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was 6 months into my MBA program, a program that was supposed to be my pathway to the respectable corporate career my parents demanded. When chef Laurent Dubois came to campus for a guest lecture series, Laurent wasn't just any chef, he was a legend. 3 Michelin stars, restaurants in Paris and New York, the kind of culinary genius who made grown food critics weep with joy. The university had asked me to help cater the reception following his lecture, probably because someone had mentioned my little cooking hobby. I spent 3 days planning a menu that would showcase everything I'd learned, every technique I'd mastered in secret. The centerpiece was a dish I'd been perfecting for months, seared duck breast with a cherry gastrique and wild mushroom risotto that took influences from classical French technique but added my own innovative twists. When Chef Laurent tasted that dish, everything changed. He found me in the kitchen afterward, still in my catering apron, cleaning up while trying not to hyperventilate about the fact that one of the world's most respected chefs had just eaten my food. He looked at me with these intense dark eyes and asked in his thick Parisian accent, "Who taught you to make a reduction like this?" "I taught myself," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "From books, videos, experimenting in my apartment kitchen?" He studied me for a long moment, then handed me his business card. "You are wasting your talent here, young lady. Come to my kitchen in New York. I will make you great." That night, I sat in my dorm room staring at that business card until the sun came up. Laurent Dubois wanted to mentor me, the family disappointment, the girl with artistic inclinations who was supposed to be learning how to manage other people's creativity instead of pursuing her own. 2 weeks later, I was standing in my parents' immaculate living room, the one with the museum-quality Persian rugs and the oil paintings of ancestors I'd never met, trying to explain why I was dropping out of my MBA program to attend culinary school. The silence that followed my announcement was so complete I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My father was the first to speak, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is absolutely unacceptable. Sarah, we've invested everything in your education. Everything. Everything except respect for what I actually want," I shot back, surprising myself with my boldness. My mother's face hardened into that expression I knew meant I was about to be written out of the family narrative. "If you pursue this hobby, you do it without our support, financial or otherwise." Emma, who was home from her first year of law school, actually laughed. "Always the rebel. Sarah, let's see how long you last cooking for minimum wage." Even Michael, who I thought might understand what it felt like to have your own dreams, just looked embarrassed for me, like I was having some kind of public breakdown that he didn't want to be associated with. That night, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and left home with nothing but my personal savings, about $8,000 I'd earned from my underground supper club, and a heart full of determination, mixed with terror. The next 5 years were the hardest of my life, but also the most real. I moved to a tiny room in Queens that I shared with 3 other struggling artists, a painter, a musician, and an actor who all understood what it meant to choose passion over security. For the first year, I worked 3 jobs just to survive: prep cook at a neighborhood bistro from 5 a.m. to noon, line cook at a midtown restaurant from 1 p.m. to 10 p.m., and weekend shifts at a bakery in Brooklyn. I slept 4 hours a night if I was lucky. My hands were constantly covered in burns and cuts. I smelled like onions and garlic so permanently that I stopped noticing it. But I was learning, growing, becoming the chef I was meant to be. Chef Laurent kept his promise. After 6 months of proving myself in his kitchen, he made me his sous chef. "You have something special," he told me one night after a particularly brutal dinner service. "You cook with your heart, not just your hands." That cannot be taught. Under Laurent's mentorship, I flourished. I learned not just technique, but philosophy. How to read a dining room, how to balance flavors like a composer balances instruments, how to create experiences rather than just meals. I absorbed everything like a sponge: classical French methods, modern molecular gastronomy, farm-to-table philosophy, the business side of running a restaurant. And then, 2.5 years ago, everything changed again. I was working a private event at Laurent's restaurant when a guest named James Anderson tried my signature course, a deconstructed bouillabaisse that played with traditional Provençal flavors in an entirely new way. James was the founder of Anderson Capital, an investment firm specializing in hospitality and food service. After dinner, he asked to meet the chef responsible for what he called the most innovative dish I've tasted in 20 years. He was surprised to find someone so young, so passionate, so ready to take on the world. "I want to invest in you," he said simply. "Whatever it takes to get you your own kitchen." 6 months later, we found the space that would become Lumière. It had been a failed nightclub in Soho, all exposed brick and soaring ceilings, with absolutely no infrastructure for a restaurant. But I could see the potential. I could envision the warm lighting, the open kitchen concept, the way sound would move through the space during a busy dinner service. The transformation took 8 months and $3.4 million. Every detail was my decision, from the custom design plates that showcased each dish perfectly, to the specific type of olive oil we'd use for bread service, to the height of the bar stools that would encourage conversation without creating noise. We opened to immediate acclaim. The New York Times gave us 4 stars within 6 months. Food and Wine featured us in their Future of American Cuisine issue. Bon Appetit called Lumière the restaurant that's redefining what it means to dine in New York. What? But the real victory came a year ago when I bought out James's investment completely. Lumière wasn't just my restaurant anymore, it was mine, fully and completely. I was sole owner, executive chef, and creative director of one of the most successful restaurants in Manhattan. Through all of this success, I maintained complete radio silence with my family. They knew I was doing something with food, but I never told them about the accolades, the financial success, or the fact that their disappointment had become exactly what they always claimed to value: a successful entrepreneur. I kept it that way intentionally. I didn't want their approval now that I had achieved the kind of success they could brag about at dinner parties. I wanted to know who I was, what I was capable of, without their validation or judgment clouding my vision. So when that cream-colored invitation arrived at my apartment 3 weeks ago, embossed with elegant script announcing Emma's engagement dinner, I was more surprised by the location than the event itself. The dinner was being held at Lumière, my restaurant, my success, my vindication. Of course, they had no idea it was mine. They'd probably chosen it because it was exclusive and impressive, exactly the kind of place that would showcase their social status. The irony was delicious in a way that had nothing to do with food. After days of deliberation, I decided to accept the invitation. Not because I was seeking their approval or forgiveness, but because I was finally secure enough in my own success to face them without crumbling under their judgment. 5 years of distance had given me perspective, strength, and most importantly, proof that I had chosen the right path. What I hadn't anticipated was how it would feel to watch them dine in my establishment, unknowingly criticizing the very dishes I had poured my heart and soul into creating. But that's exactly what awaited me as I walked through those familiar glass doors of Lumiere that evening, ready to play the role of the struggling black sheep one last time. The familiar aromas of my kitchen enveloped me as I stepped inside, saffron and reduced wine, the subtle perfume of fresh herbs that I insisted on having delivered twice daily from a farm upstate. Usually, these scents centered me, reminded me of everything I'd built from nothing. Tonight, they only intensified the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a simple black sheath dress that was actually designer, though they'd probably assume it was a knockoff from my struggling chef budget. My grandmother's pearl necklace added a touch of elegance they'd recognize as appropriate, even if they'd probably think I was trying too hard with my limited means. Marcus, my maitre d' and one of my most trusted team members, spotted me immediately. His eyes widened slightly. I rarely entered through the front door as a guest. I gave him a subtle shake of my head and mouthed, "Not yet." He nodded discreetly and continued orchestrating the evening service with the precision of a conductor. From the entrance, I could already see them. They had, of course, requested the center table, the one with the best view of the restaurant and the most visibility for other diners to admire their obvious wealth and importance. They were arranged like a tableau of affluence, my mother in head-to-toe Chanel, my father examining the wine list with exaggerated concentration, Emma draped in what looked like the latest Prada collection. Next to Emma sat a man I didn't recognize, presumably David, her fiancé, with slicked-back hair and a watch that caught the light every time he gestured. Michael and his wife Anna completed the picture, both in business attire as if they'd come straight from important board meetings to grace my restaurant with their presence. "Good evening, Miss Mitchell." Celeste, my hostess, approached with her warmest smile. She caught herself just in time before saying my name too familiarly. "Your party is already seated. May I escort you to their table?" "Thank you." "Celeste," I murmured, appreciating her discretion as we walked across the dining room I had designed to be both intimate and impressive. My mother noticed me first, her eyes performing that quick assessment I remembered from childhood, a head-to-toe scan that calculated the approximate value of my appearance and found it wanting. "Sarah," she said, rising to air-kiss my cheeks in the way that managed to be both affectionate and distant. "You've finally arrived. We were beginning to wonder." "I'm exactly on time. Mother," I replied, checking my watch. 7:30, as requested. My father stood, giving me one of those stiff hugs that ended with an awkward pat on the back. "You look healthy," he offered, which in Mitchell family speak meant I wasn't maintaining the borderline unhealthy slenderness that was prized in our social circle. Emma barely bothered to stand, offering her cheek for me to kiss. "Sarah, this is David," she announced as her fiancé rose with practiced charm. "Princeton undergrad, Wharton MBA. He introduced himself with a firm handshake that was definitely a power move I recognized from countless business meetings. "Just made partner at Goldman Sachs. No nice to meet you or I've heard so much about you, just credentials and status markers. The Mitchell family love language, spoken fluently." Michael gave me a more genuine greeting, though his wife Anna's smile seemed strained. I I would later learn she'd been the one tasked with securing this impressively exclusive reservation for tonight's celebration, and she was nervous about whether it would meet everyone's impossibly high standards. "Well," my mother said as I took the last empty seat, "we've already ordered champagne. I hope that's acceptable." I noticed they'd chosen the second most expensive option on our carefully curated list, showy enough to impress, but not so extravagant as to seem reckless. Typical Mitchell family strategy. Around us. Lumiere hummed with the energy I'd worked so hard to cultivate. The lighting was dim enough for intimacy, but bright enough to appreciate the artful plating of each dish. The sound level was perfectly balanced, conversation and privacy maintained without feeling isolated. Every table was spaced just so, close enough to create energy, far enough apart for discretion. Every single detail had been my decision, from the weight of the linen napkins to the custom-designed chairs that encouraged diners to linger without becoming uncomfortable. I watched my staff navigate the dining room with the precision I'd trained them to maintain, each movement purposeful and elegant. Jose, our sommelier, approached with the champagne, and I caught his eye as he began his presentation. The slightest raise of his eyebrow asked if I wanted him to acknowledge me. I gave an imperceptible shake of my head. "Excellent choice," he said to my father instead, presenting the bottle with practiced elegance before beginning the ritual of opening and serving. Dom Perignon 2012, an exceptional vintage. "We're celebrating an engagement," my father announced unnecessarily, clearly hoping for some special recognition or upgraded service. "Congratulations," Jose replied smoothly, his professional warmth never wavering. "Lumiere is honored to host such a special occasion." "I'm surprised you managed to get a reservation here," I said innocently. Taking a sip of the champagne I knew had been perfectly chilled to exactly 45 degrees Fahrenheit. "I've heard it's quite difficult." David leaned forward with a smug smile that made me want to roll my eyes. "I know people," he said with a wink that was supposed to be charming, but came across as arrogant. "Called in a favor with a client who's friendly with the management." I bit my tongue, knowing that the client was probably Craig Wilson, one of our regular investors who occasionally requested tables for business associates. I made a mental note to have a conversation with Craig about David's attitude. "Well, aren't you resourceful?" I murmured, raising my champagne flute as my father proposed a toast. "To Emma and David," he declared. "A perfect match and a brilliant future ahead." We clinked glasses, and I took a small sip, noting that the champagne was served at precisely the temperature I had trained my staff to maintain. The bubbles were perfect, the pour exactly right. Details my family would never notice, but that represented thousands of hours of training and refinement. "So, Sarah," my mother began, setting down her glass and fixing me with that particular attention that meant I was about to be evaluated. "Tell us what you've been up to these past few years. You've been so mysterious." The table's focus shifted to me like a spotlight, 5 pairs of eyes ready to judge, analyze, and find me lacking. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. "I've been working in food," I said simply, keeping my answer deliberately vague. "Still with that cooking phase?" Emma sighed, as though I'd admitted to a regrettable addiction that I should have outgrown years ago. "I thought surely by now you'd have moved on to something more substantial." "Not everyone can handle the corporate path," Michael added, managing to make what should have been a defense sound like gentle criticism. David looked confused. "What exactly do you do? Line cook, catering?" "Various roles," I answered, enjoying the vagueness. "I've worn many hats in the industry." "Well, we're just glad you're managing to support yourself," my mother said with the kind of fake graciousness I knew so well. though we've always said our door is open if things get too challenging financially. Before I could respond, Sophie, one of our most experienced servers, approached with the amuse-bouche, a bite-sized sphere of compressed watermelon topped with fermented black garlic, and a microgreen I had sourced from a specialized urban farm in Brooklyn. "Compliments of the kitchen," she announced, carefully placing one before each diner. Her eyes met mine briefly, a flash of loyalty and recognition before she slipped back into professional mode. "Is this all?" Emma asked, examining the single bite with obvious disappointment. "I'm famished." "It's an amuse-bouche," I explained, watching their reactions carefully. "A palate opener. The actual meal hasn't started yet." "I know what an amuse-bouche is, Sarah," Emma snapped, her voice sharp with irritation. "I'm not culturally illiterate just because I chose law instead of playing with food." I watched as they each approached my creation, a dish that had taken me months to perfect, balancing the sweetness of the compressed watermelon with the umami depth of the fermented black garlic. My mother took the smallest possible bite, ever conscious of calories. My father popped the whole thing in his mouth, barely pausing to taste the complexity of flavors I'd layered so carefully. Michael and Anna at least seemed to appreciate the sophistication of the dish, chewing thoughtfully, but Emma left hers completely untouched. "I don't do raw garlic," she declared, though the black garlic had been fermented for 60 days in a temperature-controlled environment, a process I'd perfected after 3 years of experimentation. As our server cleared the plates, I caught the flash of disappointment in her eyes at Emma's untouched creation. In that moment, I felt protective, not of myself, but of my staff who took such incredible pride in our work. I had built Lumiere not just as a restaurant, but as a family of sorts. One bound by shared passion and mutual respect rather than DNA and social obligation. This was just the beginning of the evening, but already I could feel the old family dynamics settling in like a familiar, uncomfortable coat. I was still the outsider, the one who had chosen the wrong path, whose choices needed constant justification and defense. But unlike the Sarah of 5 years ago, I now sat at this table with a secret strength, a knowledge that would soon turn this entire dynamic completely upside down. They had no idea they were sitting in my domain, criticizing my art, dismissing my life's work while benefiting from every carefully considered detail I had poured into this space. The irony was almost too delicious to bear. "So tell us about the wedding plans," I said, deliberately shifting attention back to Emma as our first course arrived. I needed to buy myself some time to process the emotions swirling inside me as I watched my family unknowingly criticize my life's work. The dish that arrived was a delicate composition of heirloom tomatoes, house-made ricotta, and basil oil that had taken me months to perfect. The tomatoes were grown specifically for us on a farm upstate, picked at the peak of ripeness that very morning. The ricotta was made fresh daily in our kitchen, and the basil oil was infused using a technique I'd learned from a master chef in Tuscany. Emma brightened immediately at the attention. "Oh, we've booked St. Thomas Church." "Of course. The reception will be at the plaza for 400 guests, though Mother thinks we should expand it to 500. "The guest list is getting unwieldy," my mother interjected, with the kind of social anxiety that only comes from managing the delicate politics of high society. "The Astors and the Whitneys aren't speaking since that unfortunate yacht incident last summer, so we can't seat them in the same section." I suppressed a smile at the gravity with which they discuss these social calculations. The intricate choreography of old money relationships never ceased to amaze me. Who could sit where? Who needed to be invited to maintain alliances? who might be offended by their table placement. 400 seems excessive, I ventured, taking a bite of the tomato dish and noting how the acidity balanced perfectly with the creamy richness of the ricotta. David leaned forward with the confidence of someone who'd clearly thought this through from a business perspective. It's networking, not just celebration. Half those invitations are relationship investments. Precisely, my father agreed, nodding approvingly. David understands the social capital aspect. A wedding of this caliber opens doors, creates opportunities. And what about you, Sarah? Emma asked, her tone suddenly sharp with something that sounded almost like malice. Any prospects on your horizon, or are you still too busy with your cooking to think about settling down? I noticed she had barely touched her food, pushing the carefully arranged heirloom tomatoes around her plate with obvious disinterest. Each tomato had been selected individually, each slice of ricotta hand-formed, each drop of basil oil placed with precision. I'm focused on my career right now, I answered simply, taking another bite of the dish I was genuinely proud of. Career? Michael repeated with a small laugh that felt like a slap. Is that what we're calling it? My mother jumped in with the kind of maternal concern that was really thinly veiled criticism. Sarah, darling, surely at 29 you're thinking about settling down. There's that lovely son of Margaret Whitley's. He's in hospital administration. I believe very stable, very respectable. I'm not looking to be set up. Mother, well, your options will become more limited with each passing year, she persisted, her voice taking on that tone of false concern I knew so well, especially in your situation. Before I could respond, our server appeared to clear the first course. I'd barely registered the taste of my own creation, too tense to properly enjoy the flavors I'd spent so much time perfecting. Was there a problem with the dish? Sophie asked, addressing Emma with professional diplomacy while noting her nearly full plate. Too acidic, Emma replied dismissively, waving her hand as if the entire course had been a personal insult. And the tomatoes could have been riper. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Those tomatoes had been perfect, selected at their peak that very morning from a farm I'd personally vetted, transported in climate-controlled vehicles to maintain their integrity. The acidity she was complaining about was the precise balance I'd spent months achieving. I'm so sorry to hear that, Sophie, our server, said with the kind of practiced diplomacy that comes from years of dealing with difficult customers. I'll be sure to inform the kitchen of your feedback. The second course arrived with theatrical precision, seared scallops with brown butter emulsion and pickled ramps, a spring special I was particularly proud of. The scallops were day boat fresh from Maine, seared to create that perfect golden crust while maintaining a translucent center. The brown butter had been carefully monitored to achieve that nutty fragrance without burning, and the pickled ramps added a bright acidity that cut through the richness. Now this looks promising, my father declared, cutting into his scallop with his fork, completely wrong technique, but I wasn't about to correct him. David swirled the wine that Jose had just poured, a Sancerre I had personally selected to pair with this course during a buying trip to the Loire Valley last year. Decent wine list here, he pronounced with the authority of someone who'd probably learned everything he knew about wine from business dinners. Not exceptional, but passable. Jose, overhearing this assessment as he passed our table, shot me a quick glance. I gave him a subtle smile. Jose had been poached from a 3 Michelin-star restaurant in Paris and had turned down offers from establishments around the world to work with me. His wine knowledge was encyclopedic, his palate refined beyond anything David could even comprehend. So, Sarah, Anna began, clearly trying to include me in the conversation while the others focused on their food. Michael mentioned you're working in food service, but you never really specified what exactly you do." Before I could answer, Emma cut in with the kind of casual cruelty that I remembered from our childhood. "She's probably hostessing somewhere, right, Sarah? Using that business degree to seat people and hand out menus? Actually, I started. "No shame in that," my father interrupted, his voice carrying that patronizing tone of false encouragement. "Everyone has to start somewhere. Though after 5 years, I would have expected some advancement." "I have advanced," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Into what?" Emma laughed at her own anticipated punchline. "Assistant manager at Applebee's?" "Emma," Michael warned, showing a rare moment of defense for me. "What? I'm just being realistic," she shot back, her voice rising slightly. "She chose to abandon her education for this passion project. Actions have consequences." I took a sip of the Sancerre, allowing the familiar mineral notes to center me. The wine was perfect, crisp, elegant, with exactly the kind of complexity that would be wasted on this table. "And how is law treating you, Emma?" I asked, deliberately changing the subject while I still had some control over my temper. "Still at Henderson and Block?" Emma's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm between positions at the moment, actually, taking time to focus on wedding planning." "She was working too many hours," David interjected quickly. 80, 90 hours a week. I told her, "My wife doesn't need to kill herself at some law firm. Once we're married, she can focus on charity work, like my mother does." I noticed the flash of something, resentment, frustration, in Emma's eyes before she smoothed her expression back to placid agreement. Apparently, the golden child wasn't quite as golden as she appeared, and her future husband had some very traditional ideas about women's roles. The third course arrived like a work of art on each plate, hand-rolled tagliatelle with spring peas, pancetta, and mint. This was one of our signature dishes, featured in Food and Wine magazines, Dishes That Define the Season article. The pasta had been rolled by hand that afternoon, each sheet carefully cut to ensure consistent thickness. The peas were so fresh they still had morning dew on them when they arrived from our supplier, and the pancetta had been cured according to a recipe I'd learned from a master salumiere in Bologna. "The portion size here is ridiculous," my mother commented, looking at the artfully plated pasta as if it had personally offended her. "All this expense for 3 bites. It's about quality over quantity." "Mother," I replied, watching David cut into his pasta rather than twirling it properly, breaking the delicate strands I had rolled by hand that morning. "The tasting menu is designed to take you through multiple flavors and textures, building to a complete experience. In my day, restaurants gave you a proper meal for your money," my father grumbled, stabbing at the pasta with obvious frustration. "This nouvelle cuisine nonsense is just a way to charge more for less food." I watched in growing dismay as my family approached each course like critics rather than diners, finding fault with portion sizes, preparation methods, even the temperature of the plates. They had no idea they were sitting in one of the most coveted reservations in the city, eating food that food critics had called transcendent and revolutionary. "So how exactly are you affording a place like this on a food service salary?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice sharp with suspicion. "This is one of the most expensive restaurants in the city." All eyes turned to me. Here it was, the question I'd been waiting for, the moment when their true feelings about my life choices would be laid bare. "I manage my finances carefully," I replied evenly. "Oh, please," Emma scoffed, setting down her fork with dramatic emphasis. "A dinner here costs more than you probably make in a week." "Who are you dating? Is he paying for this?" "I'm not dating anyone," I said, my voice remaining calm despite the storm building inside me. "Then how can you possibly afford this?" she pressed, leaning forward like a prosecutor going in for the kill. "Are you in debt? Maxing out credit cards to keep up appearances?" "Emma," Michael warned again, looking genuinely uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "No, I want to know," she insisted, her voice getting louder. Other diners were beginning to glance our way, and I could see Marcus discreetly moving closer to our table in case intervention was needed. We all rearranged our schedules for this dinner that she suggested, at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Either she's being completely financially irresponsible, or she's not being honest about her situation. Wirt. The fourth course arrived at that moment. Perfectly cooked duck breast with cherry gastrique and farro, prepared by Chef Miranda, who ran my kitchen when I wasn't on the line. The duck was a perfect medium rare, the skin crispy and rendered, the gastrique balancing sweet and tart notes that complemented the gaminess of the meat. "This duck is undercooked," David announced after one bite, his voice loud enough that other tables could hear. I looked at his plate. The duck was textbook perfect, exactly the temperature any competent chef would serve it. "It's meant to be served that way," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "Medium rare is the optimal temperature for duck breast. I prefer my meat well done," he declared, motioning aggressively for Sophie, our server. When she approached, he spoke without looking at her, treating her like she was invisible. "This is raw. Take it back and cook it properly." I saw the flash of annoyance in Sophie's eyes, quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Of course, sir. My apologies." As she took his plate, I caught her eye and gave a slight nod. She would know to have the kitchen prepare a new breast rather than ruining the existing one by overcooking it to the point of becoming leather. "Really, Sarah," my mother said once Sophie had departed, "you still haven't answered the question. How are you affording this dinner?" The tension at the table was becoming unbearable. I could feel the familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd had during countless family dinners growing up, the sense of being cornered, judged, and found wanting before I'd even had a chance to defend myself. But I wasn't that same insecure young woman anymore. I had built something remarkable, something I was genuinely proud of, something that was entirely mine. For a moment, I considered revealing everything right then and there, watching their expressions change as they realized whose restaurant they were sitting in, whose food they had been carelessly critiquing all evening before I could decide. David's overcooked duck returned, now lacking all the tenderness and complexity it had originally possessed. The meat was gray and tough, the carefully balanced flavors muted by excessive heat. "Much better," he declared after one bite, though I could see from across the table that it was now dry and flavorless. My father signaled for the wine list again. "Let's order another bottle. Something more impressive this time." As Jose approached with our leather-bound wine list, my father made a show of examining it with exaggerated expertise, finally pointing to one of our most expensive options, a Bordeaux priced at over $800. "This one should be adequate," he declared, with the confidence of someone who believed expense equaled quality. I knew that bottle intimately. I had selected it during a trip to Bordeaux the previous year, meeting with the vintner personally to understand the terroir, the vintage conditions, the philosophy behind the wine. It was spectacular, but completely wrong for the remaining courses we would be serving. "May I suggest something that might pair better with the remaining dishes?" I ventured carefully. My father waved me off dismissively. "I think I know wines. Sarah." Jose caught my eye, silently asking for direction. I gave him a small nod. Let my father have his way. This wasn't the hill I wanted to die on, and frankly, I was curious to see how far their arrogance would take them. As the evening progressed through the final savory course and into dessert, a deconstructed lemon tart that was one of my personal masterpieces, the criticism continued. Every dish met with some complaint. Every attempt I made to contribute to the conversation somehow twisted into evidence of my failure to launch into a real career. The dessert was a work of art. Lemon curd so smooth it looked like silk. Meyer lemon sorbet that burst with sunshine. Candied lemon zest that provided textural contrast, all arranged on the plate like an abstract painting. It had taken me 2 years to perfect this dish, balancing the tartness of the lemons with subtle sweetness, creating temperature and textural contrasts that played on the palate like music. "Too tart," Emma announced after one small bite. "And what's with all these pieces scattered around the plate? In my day, dessert was dessert. A nice slice of cake or a proper creme brulee." By the time coffee was served, I felt emotionally drained. The double burden of enduring my family's condescension while watching them thoughtlessly critique my life's work was becoming unbearable. Every dismissive comment felt like a personal attack, not just on me, but on every member of my staff who had poured their passion into creating this experience. Then came the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating all evening. Marcus approached with the black leather folder containing the bill, placing it discreetly in the center of the table, with the kind of understated elegance I'd trained all my staff to maintain. My father reached for it immediately, a reflex of patriarchal duty that was as predictable as sunrise. But David intercepted it with practiced smoothness. "Please, Richard, allow me," he said with the kind of generosity that was really a power move. "Consider it my treat to celebrate this wonderful occasion." My father made the expected token protest before graciously acquiescing. I watched as David opened the folder, his confident smile slowly fading as he registered the total. I knew exactly what he was looking at. A dinner for 7 people with premium wine pairings, special preparation requests, and that $800 Bordeaux would easily run over $8,000. Not outrageous for a restaurant of Lumiere's caliber, but certainly a statement, especially for someone who'd been so casually dismissive all evening. "Is there a problem?" my father asked, noticing David's change in expression. No. David recovered quickly, though I could see the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his wallet. "Just confirming the calculation." He extracted a black American Express card with deliberate slowness, making sure everyone at the table noticed the exclusive tier of his credit line. Emma, perhaps sensing David's discomfort and wanting to regain control of the narrative, chose that moment to circle back to her earlier interrogation. "So, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you never did explain how you're managing to contribute to this extravagant dinner. We wouldn't want you stretching yourself financially on our account." All eyes turned to me again. I could feel the familiar dynamic asserting itself. Emma, the successful one, me, the struggling disappointment who needed protection from her own poor judgment. "I can cover my portion," I said simply. "Can you, though?" she pressed, leaning forward with the kind of aggressive curiosity that was really cruelty disguised as concern. "Because we all know what food service pays. Can you honestly afford a place like this?" The table fell silent. The question hung in the air like a challenge, so deliberately insulting that even my parents looked uncomfortable. "Emma?" my mother murmured. "Perhaps this isn't—" "No. I want to know," Emma insisted, her eyes locked on mine with laser focus. "We've spent the entire evening pretending that everything's fine, that Sarah's choice to throw away her education hasn't left her struggling. I think we deserve some honesty." I felt a hot flush rising from my chest to my face. 5 years of distance, 5 years of building my own life and achieving remarkable success, and nothing had changed. I was still the family disappointment, still being asked to justify my existence, still being treated like a child who needed to be managed and controlled. David, perhaps sensing an opportunity to reassert control after the shock of the bill, joined in. "If you need help with your portion, just say so. There's no shame in accepting assistance from family." "I don't need help," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Then how exactly are you paying for this?" Emma demanded, her voice rising. "A meal here costs more than you probably make in a month." I opened my mouth to respond, to finally reveal everything, when David suddenly frowned at the bill. "Wait," he said, his voice sharp with confusion. "There's a mistake here. They've only charged us for the wines, not the food." He signaled aggressively for Marcus. His earlier charm completely evaporated. "Excuse me, there's an error on our check." Marcus approached our table with the perfect timing of someone who had been watching this drama unfold from a discreet distance. In reality, he probably had been. My staff knew me well enough to be protective when they sensed I was in distress. "Is there a problem, sir?" Marcus asked with professional courtesy. "Yes, you've only charged us for the beverages, not the meal," David said, pointing at the bill with obvious irritation. "We need the correct total." Marcus looked at the check, then at me, his expression carefully neutral but questioning. In that moment, I made my decision. The charade had gone on long enough. I gave Marcus a slight nod. "There's no error, sir," Marcus said smoothly, his voice taking on a warmth that hadn't been there before. "The dinner portion has been taken care of." "By whom?" my father asked, frowning in confusion. Marcus turned to me, his professional demeanor giving way to the genuine respect and affection of someone who had worked with me for 2 years. "Welcome back, Miss Mitchell," he said clearly, his voice carrying across our immediate area. "Your usual table for the investor meeting is prepared. Would you like me to handle the situation here first?" The silence that fell over our table was so complete I could hear the soft jazz playing in the background, the gentle clink of silverware from other tables, the whispered conversations of couples lost in their own romantic worlds. 6 pairs of eyes turned to me in various stages of confusion, shock, and dawning comprehension. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through my veins. "Yes, please close out David's beverage tab. The rest is on the house, as usual." "Very good, Miss Mitchell," Marcus replied, taking the leather folder from David's slack grip. "And Chef Miranda mentioned she'd like your opinion on the new spring menu items when you have a moment." "I'll stop by the kitchen before my meeting," I assured him. As Marcus departed, I finally looked directly at my family. Their expressions ranged from confusion to shock to the first dawning understanding of what had just happened. What is happening?" my mother finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath. The moment I had both dreaded and secretly anticipated for 5 years had finally arrived. "Welcome to Lumiere," I said simply, my voice calm and clear. "My restaurant." The silence that followed my revelation stretched for what felt like an eternity. I watched as the truth slowly sank in, each family member processing the information at their own pace, their faces cycling through disbelief, shock, and something that looked almost like fear. My father was the first to recover, his business mind immediately shifting into calculation mode. "Your restaurant," he repeated carefully, as if testing the words to see if they made sense. "You work here," my mother added, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, Mother," I clarified, feeling a strange calm settle over me after years of carrying this secret. "I don't work here. I own Lumiere. I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor." "That's impossible," Emma blurted out, her voice cracking slightly. "This is one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. It's been featured in major magazines. Yes, I agreed, my voice growing stronger with each word. Food and Wine last month. Bon Appetit the month before that. The New York Times gave us 4 stars in their review 18 months ago. We're booked solid for the next 4 months. David was staring at me as though I'd suddenly started speaking in ancient Greek. The man who had been so confident about knowing people and calling in favors now looked like he was having trouble processing basic information. But you said you worked in food service, he stammered. You were vague about everything. Because I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I was struggling, I explained, my voice gaining strength as I finally spoke the truth I'd been holding back. And you've all made that abundantly clear tonight. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearl necklace, her go-to gesture when socially destabilized. Sarah, darling, why wouldn't you tell us about this achievement? The way she emphasized achievement spoke volumes. Success made my choices retroactively acceptable in a way that passion alone never could. Would you like the full story? I asked, looking around the table. Without waiting for an answer, I continued. After I left 5 years ago, I moved to the city with $8,000 in savings. I rented a tiny room in Queens with 3 other struggling artists. For the first year, I worked 3 jobs just to survive. I paused, watching their uncomfortable expressions as I painted a picture of the reality they'd forced me into. Prep cook from 5 a.m. to noon, line cook from 1 p.m. to 10 p.m., weekend shifts at a bakery in Brooklyn. I slept 4 hours a night if I was lucky. I had burns and cuts covering my hands. I studied technique obsessively in my few free moments. Michael was watching me with what appeared to be genuine interest, while Anna looked impressed, despite herself. My parents seemed frozen in a state of reassessment, probably calculating how much suffering they could have prevented if they'd simply supported my dreams from the beginning. Chef Laurent, who had initially encouraged me to pursue culinary arts, took me under his wing, I continued. I became his sous chef within 18 months. The work was brutal, but I was learning from one of the greatest chefs in the world. I gestured around the elegant dining room that surrounded us. 2.5 years ago, I was working a private event at Laurent's restaurant when a guest named James Anderson tried my signature course, a deconstructed bouillabaisse that played with traditional Provençal flavors in an entirely new way. James is the founder of Anderson Capital, specializing in hospitality investments. Anderson Capital, my father repeated, recognition dawning in his voice. They're major players in the restaurant industry. James was so impressed that he asked to meet the chef responsible for what he called the most innovative dish I'd tasted in 20 years, I said, remembering that pivotal moment. He was surprised to find someone so young, so passionate, so ready to revolutionize the dining scene. I paused to take a sip of water, noting how the entire table was hanging on every word. For the first time in my adult life, I had their complete, undivided attention. James became my first investor. We found this space, which was a failed nightclub at the time. I developed the concept, designed every aspect of the menu, hired and trained the staff, oversaw every detail from the lighting fixtures to the custom plateware you've been eating from tonight. But the cost, my father said, his business mind still struggling with the numbers. A restaurant of this caliber, in this location, it must have required millions. $3.4 million for the initial investment, I confirmed, watching his eyebrows rise. James brought in 2 other investors initially. We opened to immediate critical acclaim, partly due to Laurent's endorsement and industry connections. 6 months in, we were profitable. 3 months after that, I used the restaurant's success to secure additional funding and bought out all my investors. The magnitude of what I'd accomplished was finally sinking in. I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, the kind of business acumen required to turn a failed nightclub into one of Manhattan's most successful restaurants, the financial sophistication needed to buy out major investors, the sheer audacity of succeeding so spectacularly in one of the most competitive industries in the world. That's why you suggested we meet here, Emma realized, her voice small and uncertain. You knew all along. Actually, no, I corrected her. Anna chose this restaurant. Didn't you? Anna? All eyes turned to Michael's wife, who blushed deeply. I had no idea it was yours. Sarah. The concierge at Michael's firm recommended it as the most impressive new restaurant in the city. I swear I didn't know. Of course you didn't, I assured her gently. No one in the family knew. That was deliberate on my part. But why keep it secret? My mother pressed, her voice taking on that coaxing tone she used when trying to manage a social situation. We're your family. We would have been proud. I couldn't help the sharp laugh that escaped me. Would you? The same family who called cooking servants' work? Who cut me off completely when I chose culinary school? Who just spent the entire evening making snide comments about my life choices? My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Now, Sarah, that's unfair. We were concerned about your stability, your future. If we'd known you had this kind of business acumen— That's exactly my point, I interrupted, my voice gaining intensity. You couldn't respect my passion alone. It only has value to you now that it comes with financial success and social status. At that moment, Chef Miranda approached our table in her pristine whites, with Miranda Torres, chef de cuisine, embroidered on the breast. She made an impressive figure, confident, professional, clearly someone of significant authority in the kitchen. Sorry to interrupt. Sarah, she said, her voice carrying the easy familiarity of a trusted colleague. The Matsuhisa party has arrived for their tasting menu, and Severe Magazine wants to confirm your interview for next week's feature. Also, your publisher called about the cookbook cover design approval. I nodded, feeling a surge of pride at the casual mention of these professional accomplishments. Thank you, Miranda. Please tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes. As Miranda departed, I registered the growing amazement on my family's faces. Cookbook? Emma echoed, her voice barely audible. Coming out this fall with Knopf, I confirmed. 120 recipes with personal stories about the journey from family expectations to culinary success. Sarah, my mother began, her voice taking on that familiar coaxing tone. This is all so impressive. Why didn't you tell us sooner? We could have helped, supported you, celebrated your achievements. The way you supported me when I needed it most, I asked quietly. By cutting me off completely? By treating my passion like an embarrassing phase I needed to outgrow? We thought it was a phase, my father protested, his voice defensive. How were we to know you had this level of entrepreneurial spirit? You've clearly inherited my business sense. I felt a flash of white-hot anger at his attempt to claim credit for my success. I built this myself, I said firmly. Without your connections, your money, or your support, every success, every innovation, every achievement you see here tonight, I earned it through my own passion, dedication, and vision. David, who had been suspiciously quiet during this entire revelation, suddenly perked up with obvious interest. A cookbook deal must come with a substantial advance. And this place— He gestured around appreciatively, his earlier criticisms conveniently forgotten. It must generate significant revenue. Do you have plans for expansion, perhaps a restaurant group? I have some contacts in hospitality investment who might be interested. I couldn't help but laugh at the transparent opportunism of this pivot from condescension to networking. I'm doing quite well with my current advisors, but thank you, I said coolly. Emma shot David a look of pure irritation before turning back to me. So all this time, while I thought you were struggling, you were actually succeeding, building all this. Yes, I said simply. And tonight, she continued, her voice hardening with embarrassment and what might have been guilt. You let us sit here criticizing your food, your wine list, your portion sizes, all while knowing it was yours? I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I was still the family failure, I explained. And now I know. You weren't concerned about my well-being. Emma, you were enjoying what you thought was your superiority. The restaurant had gradually emptied as we talked, the evening service winding down around us. Jose approached with a bottle of aged cognac, our special reserve that we only brought out for VIP guests and special occasions. Your special reserve cognac. Miss Mitchell, he said warmly, for your investors' meeting, and Chef Miranda says the kitchen is ready whenever you are. Thank you, Jose, I replied. Please let Miranda know I'll be there in 5 minutes. As Jose departed, I turned back to my stunned family. I have a business to run, I said, rising from my seat with newfound confidence. Thank you for coming this evening. Sarah, wait, my mother said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. Don't leave like this, Yurko. We should celebrate your success. Perhaps we could all have brunch this weekend. Catch up properly? I looked at her, seeing for the first time not the intimidating figure of my childhood, but simply a woman trying desperately to salvage her pride and social position. I'll think about it, I said diplomatically. But right now, I have investors waiting and a kitchen to oversee. As I turned to leave, Michael stood up. Sarah, he said, his voice quieter than the others, more genuine. For what it's worth, this is incredible. What you've built here, what you've accomplished, it's remarkable. I'm sorry for not supporting you sooner. Of all the reactions tonight, his felt the most authentic. I gave him a small nod of acknowledgement before walking away from the table where I had just fundamentally changed the dynamics of my family forever. I'd barely made it 10 steps when I heard the sharp click of heels behind me. Turning, I found my mother hurrying to catch up, her perfectly composed facade beginning to crack for the first time all evening. Sarah, please, she said, lowering her voice and glancing around nervously. You can't just drop this revelation and walk away. We need to talk about this properly. I glanced toward the private dining room where my actual investors were waiting, a group of sophisticated food industry professionals discussing funding for my second restaurant concept. These were people who valued my expertise, who sought my opinion, who treated me as an equal rather than a disappointment to be managed. I have a meeting. Mother, postpone it, she insisted, her voice taking on that commanding tone I remembered from childhood. This is family. Family hasn't been a priority for you in 5 years, I replied, keeping my voice steady. My business commitments don't suddenly become optional because you've finally decided my career is worthy of your attention. The rest of the family had followed her, creating an awkward cluster near the bar area. My father looked distinctly uncomfortable, a man used to being in control of every situation, finding himself completely out of his depth. Emma's expression wavered between resentment and something that might have been genuine respect for the first time in our adult lives. Perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow, my father suggested, slipping into his problem-solving business mode. Dinner at our place, and we have much to discuss. Including how we might help you expand, David added eagerly, his earlier shock replaced by naked ambition. My firm specializes in... I don't need your help. I interrupted firmly. I didn't build this place to finally win your approval. I built it because this is what I love, what I'm passionate about, what I'm genuinely gifted at. The fact that it's financially successful doesn't suddenly make my passion more valid than it was 5 years ago. No one is saying that, darling. My mother backpedaled quickly. We're simply proud of what you've accomplished. Surely you can understand that. Are you proud, Mother? I asked, studying her face carefully. Or are you relieved that my choices no longer embarrass you socially? Her slight flinch told me I'd hit closer to home than she was comfortable with. That's unfair, my father interjected. We've always wanted what's best for you. No, I corrected him, my voice gaining strength. You wanted what aligned with your vision for me. There's a difference. Miranda appeared at my side, her presence a welcome reminder of the professional world I'd built for myself. The Hartford group is asking if you'll be joining them soon, she said quietly. 2 minutes, I promised her. As Miranda nodded and stepped away, I turned back to my family. I need to go. Sarah, Emma stepped forward, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge for the first time all evening. And I owe you an apology. The things I said tonight, they were unkind. They were honest, I replied. That's actually the silver lining of this evening. I got to see exactly how you all view me when you think I'm struggling. That's not fair, Michael protested, joining the conversation. People make judgments based on the information they have. You didn't know I was successful, I clarified, but you didn't know I was pursuing something I genuinely loved either. That should have been enough for my family to show basic respect and support. A heavy silence fell over the group. The truth of what I'd said was undeniable, and for once, none of them had a quick comeback or deflection ready. You're right, my father finally admitted, surprising me. Richard Mitchell didn't acknowledge mistakes easily. We should have supported your passion regardless of its financial outcome. Where do we go from here? My mother asked, genuine uncertainty creeping into her voice, another rarity. I took a deep breath, considering the question carefully. Despite everything these people had put me through, they were still my family. The hurt they'd caused was real and deep, but so was our shared history. Complete estrangement had never been my goal, just enough distance to build my own life without their judgment clouding every decision. I don't know yet, I answered honestly, but tonight has made one thing crystal clear. If we're going to have any relationship moving forward, it needs to be on completely different terms. Of course. My father agreed quickly. I'm not the family failure seeking redemption, I continued. I'm a successful chef and business owner who deserves the same respect you'd give any other accomplished professional. That means no more comments about my life choices, no more unsolicited career advice, and absolutely no attempts to network through my restaurant, I added with a pointed look at David, who had the grace to look embarrassed. What about Emma's wedding? My mother asked tentatively. We'd still like you to be there. As my sister, Emma added, her voice softer than I'd heard it all evening. Not as whatever we thought you were before tonight. I looked at her, trying to see past the years of competition and judgment. Despite everything, there had been good times too, secrets shared as children, supporting each other through teenage heartbreaks, inside jokes that no one else understood. I'll be there, I promised. Then, after a moment's consideration, I added, and if you'd like, I could host a dinner for the wedding party here at Lumiere. As my gift. Emma's eyes widened with surprise and something that looked like genuine gratitude. You would do that? After how we've treated you tonight? You're still my sister, I said simply, but to be clear, This isn't me seeking your approval. It's me offering something I'm proud of, on my own terms." "I understand," she said quietly, "and I would be honored." A genuine smile, the first of the evening, passed between us. "Now I really do need to go," I said, gesturing toward the private dining room where some of the most influential people in the food industry were waiting for me. "Of course." My father nodded. "Your business comes first." "Not always," I corrected him. "But tonight, yes." As they gathered their things to leave, I added, "I'm free for brunch on Sunday. Not at your club, though. There's a small place in the East Village I think you should experience. Real food. Real passion. No pretense." "We'll be there," my mother promised, looking relieved at this small olive branch. I watched them file out of the restaurant, their perspectives irrevocably changed. As the door closed behind them, I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Miranda appeared beside me again. "Everything okay?" "Getting there," I replied, feeling oddly lighter despite the emotional intensity of the evening. "Family is complicated," she laughed knowingly. My mother still introduces me as her daughter who works at a restaurant, like I'm a teenage waitress at Denny's instead of chef de cuisine at one of Manhattan's most respected establishments. I smiled, grateful for her understanding. "Let's go talk about that spring menu. I have some new ideas I'm excited about." As we walked toward the kitchen, my sanctuary and my achievement, my true home, I realized that the most important revelation of the evening wasn't showing my family what I'd built. It was fully recognizing and owning my success for myself, regardless of their approval or acknowledgement. 2 weeks later, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically things had changed. The Sunday brunch had gone surprisingly well. I'd taken my family to Alma's, a hole-in-the-wall gem run by a former colleague from my early days working the line. My parents had been visibly uncomfortable at first with the mismatched chairs and graffiti-decorated walls, but the food, unpretentious yet masterfully executed, had won them over completely. I never knew simple eggs could taste like this, my father had admitted, mopping up the last of his shakshuka with homemade sourdough bread. Small steps. Not a complete transformation, but definitely progress. Now, sitting at my usual table after closing time, I watched my staff complete their final duties of the evening. Emma was counting the register while humming softly to herself. Marcus and Jose were discussing wine pairings for tomorrow's private event. Miranda had left an hour earlier after we'd finalized the spring menu revisions that would debut next week. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Wedding planning nightmare. Florists just tripled their quote. Any chance you're free for coffee tomorrow? Could use some straight talk from someone who won't just tell me what I want to hear." I smiled at this unexpected request for my opinion. Another small step forward. I texted back confirming a time and place. The relationship with my family was evolving into something I couldn't have predicted 6 months ago. Not the unconditional embrace I might have once craved, but something potentially more valuable. A measured respect between adults with different values and life paths. My mother had called 3 times in the past 2 weeks, her usual formality gradually softening into genuine questions about my work, my philosophy, my plans for the future. My father had forwarded an article about female entrepreneurs in the hospitality industry, along with a note that simply said, "Thought you might find this interesting." Even Michael had reached out, asking if he could bring his children to see the kitchen sometime. "I want them to know they have options," he'd said during our phone conversation. "That success doesn't have to look the same for everyone." These were fragile beginnings. Delicate shoots of a relationship that might actually be built on mutual respect rather than conditional approval. The real healing. I was learning happens in quiet moments and small gestures, in the gradual rewriting of old patterns and expectations. But the most significant change wasn't in my family's perception of me. It was in how I'd finally stopped measuring my worth through their eyes. The validation I had once desperately sought from them now felt strangely unnecessary. I had proven myself not to them, but to myself. This realization had rippled through other areas of my life as well. I'd launched a mentorship program for young chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds, offering them the guidance and opportunities I'd had to fight so hard to find. Every Saturday morning, Lumiere's Kitchen transformed into a classroom for 8 aspiring culinary artists who reminded me of my younger self, passionate, determined, needing only someone who believed in their potential. One of them, Zoe, had shown such exceptional promise that I'd offered her a full apprenticeship. Watching her confidence grow with each new skill mastered brought a satisfaction different from any professional accolade I'd received. I opened my notebook to a fresh page and began writing the introduction to my cookbook, the words finally flowing freely. Food has always been my truest language. When words failed me, I spoke through flavors. When paths seemed unclear, I followed my palate. The dishes in this book are more than recipes. They're chapters of a life lived in pursuit of authenticity rather than approval. 5 years ago, I stood at a crossroads between expectation and passion. Choosing the latter cost me dearly at first, but ultimately led to the richest feast I could have imagined, not merely in professional success, but in the discovery that true wealth isn't measured by external validation or material achievement, but by the courage to honor your own voice, even when it speaks in whispers against the shouts of doubt. The kitchen taught me that the most essential ingredient in any dish and any life is authenticity. You can mask flavors with heavy sauces. You can dress up simple ingredients with elaborate presentations. But true satisfaction comes only when each element is allowed to be its honest self, contributing to something greater while maintaining its individual integrity. This is the story of learning to cook and live with that kind of honesty. I set down my pen, feeling a profound sense of completion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, finalizing the location for my second restaurant, completing the cookbook manuscript, continuing to navigate the delicate rebuilding of family relationships. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection in the restaurant I'd built from nothing, I felt an unshakable sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been nights of exhaustion so complete I'd fallen asleep standing up in walk-in coolers, burns and cuts that left permanent scars on my hands, moments of doubt so intense I'd questioned everything. But I had persevered, not because I needed to prove my worth to others, but because I couldn't imagine living any other way. In choosing authenticity over approval, I'd found something more valuable than either success or family validation. I'd found myself. Have you ever had to choose between meeting others' expectations and following your own heart? The path of authenticity isn't always the easiest one, but it's the only one that leads to genuine fulfillment. Sometimes the most important approval you can seek is your own. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, the most meaningful success is measured not by others' standards, but by the joy and purpose you find along your own path. The courage to be authentically yourself, even when it disappoints others, is the greatest gift you can give not just to yourself, but to the world that needs exactly what you have to offer. Now go out there and cook up your own version of success, one authentic ingredient at a time.